Our primary resource here is the forest, wood. We have very little else to rely on.
They need opportunities. 90% plus unemployment in most northern communities.
It's sacred. It's our food. It's our food source. You know, fish is our #1 food source.
We have to be partners with any industry that is going to come into Lac Willam's territory.
The land will give us benefit. And everybody's saying Mother Earth, that's part of the hippie movement, so.
Our land was taken from us, and our great-grandfathers and grandmothers were forced to live in this little postage stamp. And the beginning of the oppression started then, because they had literally, it was against the law to hunt in their own country. It was against the law to fish.
The whole experience of residential schools was a hidden secret for a very long time. Those institutions were cruel and brutal and dismissive. There were all kinds of abuses, physical abuse, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse.
And the end result was obviously what you've seen. Alcoholism became a norm. Kids weren't taken off to residential school. When they came back, they were neither fish nor fowl. They weren't carriers or native people, but neither were they white people.
And all we had before us, all we could see in our future, was despair and that hopelessness. And as a result of that, so many of us sunk into addiction and violence and all kinds of things that were harmful, self-destroying.
So all of that has contributed to a great deal of problems, I guess, as well as you call it, in our societies. Our children are badly educated. Those that are educated usually leave, the brain drain, and we can ill afford to have any kind of a drain, let alone brains. But that's what happened.
And then shortly thereafter, people were told that they can move to public housing, free housing, and, welfare. So now you're talking about a nation that has survived for thousands of years without any help from anybody or government, and now they're all, put in the communities and told them that you don't have to do nothing.
And it's time to change that for us. There are people like me, many of us, who are wanting something different, who want to be respected, who want to have integrity, who want to feel value and embrace purpose. And we see a future where we can do that now.
Before contact, First Nation communities have been there and have been living there, have been harvesting that area, have been hunting in that area. How do we make people who've really founded this country before it was Canada, by living here, how do we make them feel like they belong to Canada?
The quickest ways to get First Nations out of their social problems and their poverty issues is to basically just give them a job, or give them an opportunity at a job, and show them that they can dictate their own future as an individual. And if you do that as an individual, you can uplift your entire people.
And I've heard reconciliation defined as, you know, the path forward. How do we do that?
So the last piece of the puzzle in terms of reconciliation is to deal with the poverty issues. And what better way than to get First Nations to be a part of driving the economy of BC?
And really, how can we do this on our own? How can we create those relationships?
Well, I think those relationships are improving because they're being forced to understand that First Nations, through court actions and other means, have a lot of power.
The court cases have shown their rights and title over their traditional territories. So we're in a different position now where we are governments, but we're learning how to govern.
Corporations are finally understanding that. They quit hiding behind the province, quit hiding behind the feds. The courts have articulated, go talk to the Indians, right? And so they're doing that. And so they're starting to pay us taxes, they're starting to pay us revenue, those kinds of things. And so that's all we wanted. We're okay with commerce.
That comes from hydro, that comes from wind, that comes from aggregates, mining.
That in itself is what gives us those opportunities to go forward, to negotiate, to make those deals, to better our communities by ending up with agreements that really do mean a partnership and that can change the lives for our people.
Having said that, the corporate piece is the partnering with First Nations and vice versa. First Nations partnering with corporations to make things, to develop goals.
And that's where mining companies who come in our territories are really important. They could help us to achieve some of those necessary outcomes. Employment, working every day, and just feeling like we're making a contribution not only to ourselves but to family and community.
It's not just about aquaculture at the end of the day. It's not just about forestry at the end of the day. We have to think about education. We have to think about health and welfare. We have to think about mental healthness. We have to think about the safety of our communities. And all that has to be part of one larger discussion when it comes to resource management.
We need to get involved. We need to get active. We not need to sit on the sidelines and act like industry is just going to pass us by. Because that's what's happened.
Because the changes we need with the poverty, with the water, it all requires big money. And that big money is only coming from economic development and big investments.
We understand what money can do for us, right? You know, money is the ultimate resource that can mitigate issues, but it also can mitigate development issues, right? So, meaning we can build our infrastructure, we can build local sports centers like arenas.
And I believe that First Nations have to leverage that as much as possible to get as many benefits to run the health, education, to build their economies and to build wealth.
It's housing, health, education, social issues that are all important too. And jobs. It makes people feel better about themselves, bringing home a paycheck and providing for the family. I think that's key.
Classic issues, health, education, all that. On the overall, it's eradicating poverty.
And so that's kind of why you have so much support by First Nations for this. Because if the project doesn't happen, the benefits don't flow.
So I know in the past we've had oil and gas development in our region, and people in the communities. We're all working. We had our young people starting to buy their own machines, their own trucks, and starting to feel good about themselves. And even talking about buying their own homes because government housing couldn't give them the proper homes, or if they did give them homes, they were paying 30% of their gross pay, just going back to a house that they would never own. So you started feeling proud as a leader that your young people are now talking about investing into themselves.
And imagine when that family takes that money and they invest in the local restaurant or local grocery store. That money keeps going into that community and it continues to be circulated. So that's how we lift communities out of poverty. One of the ways we lift communities out of poverty.
We realize that we need to join mainstream society in all its works. which means private enterprise, it means corporations, it means using that kind of instrument to develop your economy. We're not opposed to any of that, but you have to take other parts of your society into consideration. And in our instance, we draw the line on the environment.
In that area, like a lot of our people are not really opposed to any developments. It's just that we need to make sure that that all the proper steps are taken. That there's we talk about the United Nations rights of Indigenous people. We talk about freedom of prior informed consent, because that's where we hunted, we fished, we gathered medicines, and we rely on that land out there. That that those things that people understand that when we talk about that's what we're looking at first and foremost.
Like I said, it's not for the money, it's always for the land and the people. So when the decision comes to me, I think of those two first before the money. But if those two can comfortably balance in life for my community and the communities around us, I have no problem making those decisions for my community.
We want to buy the pipe, not because we want to be oil barons, but what we want is the economic benefit, but most importantly, the environmental oversight, right? So that we can be satisfied that this pipe continues to be operated in a safe manner.
For Indigenous groups, always the number one issue is environment, but unlike an environmental group that makes all of its money by stopping everything, the leaders of Indigenous communities have to have business opportunities, social welfare opportunities, employment, and all of those other things. And it's not as simple as an environmental decision.
I've never seen an environmental organization establish itself and have a sustainable benefit for the community, because they're in and then they're out. They've never provided a job for the community. So if you look from the environmentalist side, they don't factor in where we got bad housing or you have alcohol and drugs, you got homelessness, etc. They're just focusing on the project that they want to stop, right?
When the Aboriginals was just trying to find a way out of poverty, they weren't trying to destroy economic development. They weren't trying to destroy the jobs or the economy. They weren't trying to do that. And that's what the Aboriginals across BC and Canada are realizing now, that they got co-opted into somebody else's agenda, and that's what they're trying to reverse now.
Eco-colonialism. Basically what that means is the environmental communities are acting and co-opting First Nations communities in the same way that colonial governments did, on contact.
What is eco-colonialism? There's a number of terms coming out now: red washing, eco-colonialism, and I didn't use that term. It was actually a fellow by the name of Calvin Helena that used that term. And what I think he was referring to is that basically Aboriginals were used for a certain agenda and ignored to a certain point. And being used in terms of when the first settlers came to Canada, being used to settle Canada. And then once they were used, Aboriginals were discarded. And I think that's what he's referring to now. The environmentalists are actually using Aboriginals to further their own ends, and then once they have no use for them, they discard them. And I think that's where the eco-colonialism term came about.
Research it. Pipeline from the beginning to end. There's communities that have consented and they've already gotten involved. And so when the white media shows up on nightly news with CBC or CTV or whatever, and it shows us banging on drums and stuff like that, that's not the case for everybody. But Canada and Canadian society is used to seeing us as one people. That's not necessarily the case, because our communities want to get involved. They want to get engaged. There's a lot of them, but those are the ones that are shy. and they'll never show up on TV.
I believe that the majority of First Nations want to take part in the economy because as it stands now, currently we don't have enough for health, education, culture.
You know, not all First Nations are against everything. And it's always the no side that is loud. And that's why I like getting our message out that we want to look at things. We want to base them on facts, anything that's being proposed. And you have to get the right information out there and ensure that we get the best information to our membership so that they can make an informed decision.
Look at whether First Nations across northern Alberta and BC would support a crude oil pipeline. We went out to the communities all along the possible route, talked to them. They said very clearly that they weren't opposed to pipelines, but the environmental model had to meet their standards.
But the community looks at the project because it brings in employment, it brings in business development, it brings in dollars for community programs, for children, for scholarships, you know, better health activities, at least healthy activities. So it benefits the whole community.
So we've got several economic opportunities that are at hand. Because we live in a rural area, we don't have the opportunity of a highway running through our community, so we have to be really creative in economic development for the participation of our community members.
But the ripple effect of economic development in Indigenous communities goes, you know, to the next community and to the next municipality and to the whole region, and from that region to the entire province, and from the entire province to the entire country.
I think there's a emerging new perspective about development, and it's one that is more open-minded about development on traditional territories.
I think the new generation of leaders that are coming up now that are more independent thinking and more brave and courageous to actually forge a new future based on truth, not on fear-mongering or rhetoric. I think those bands are actually the future of Aboriginals.
We're ready to go. We have all the lands identified that's open for development because we have our land use plan in place. We've talked to our people. They've showed us what areas they don't want people going into. So to me, there's certainty there.
You know, the government wants it, industry wants it, Indigenous people want it. So now we just got to do it.
To have a better tomorrow so that we're better educated, better environment, and a brighter future. It's just that simple.
There's a major political and business announcement in British Columbia today. It's a $40 billion deal for a natural gas pipeline to the West Coast.
There is hope on the horizon in Kitimat, BC. The community breathing a collective sigh of relief now that the LNG Canada project is finally a reality.
The line will begin near Dawson Creek and go 670 kilometers west to Kitimat, where the gas will be liquefied in a plant to be built there.
Today's announcement by LNG Canada represents the single largest private sector investment in the history of Canada.
And while this project is being named the biggest private investment in Canada's history, it's the job numbers that matter most to this community. Up to 10,000 will be created during construction, and up to 950 permanent positions will be needed to keep things running. Isla First Nation says securing jobs were also a key part of their negotiations.
History is unfolding before our eyes. We are having a share, and we are having our say.
In BC, we're just getting started. We're the example. It's not like 30 or 40 years ago where the standards were almost non-existent. It's a different day and age, and Canada's leading the way.